Hi guys, some of you will know me as a founding member of this dig group, but one of the things you may not know about me is I am passionate about GIS, and that includes things like LiDAR, NDVI and imaging techniques to help research the ground that we detect on. And as part of that, I just want to go through some of the things you can do at home for free that is going to really help improve your research. So let's get into it. So what is LiDAR? Well, LiDAR is essentially scanning of a surface with lasers. It's like taking a photograph but pinging lots of lasers off the surface to create a 3D model rather than a 2D model. And because of that, that's why sources like NLS and LiDAR Finder aren't the best. They're good, they will happily get you part of the way there, but not all of the way. And I can demonstrate that. So this is a composite Hillshade, and when we're talking about LiDAR and everyone talks about LiDAR in this community, they're talking essentially what's called a hillshade, and that's where there's a light source lighting a scene across and creating an image like this. But because it's technically a 3D model, we are always bound to somebody else's interpretation of what the scene should be, and that can catch you out. So for example, this is just a random DM of an area in Devon that I've downloaded. I've never looked at it before. I'd had a quick scan across the map just to see what I could see and some examples I could pull out. So you'll see here on the map, there's a nice oval shape. And if I caught that and a white area around it, I might think, that looks like a bulb arrow potentially, or a collapsed bulb arrow, something like that. I'd want to look into that further. But with a LiDAR example you might check online, you wouldn't be able to do anything more with it. But that data that they use to create that image is available to us, and we can use some open source software like this, like QGIS, it's completely free, to interpret that data differently. So if I turn that off, you'll see we've got this LiDAR data. Now when you get it, it will look something like this. But what we can do is we can change, one, the altitude of the lighting source, i.e. the sun, and two, the angle at which it casts across a scene, because it is a 3D image. And also we can change something called the Z factor. Now use this sparingly, because you can start seeing artifacts that aren't actually there. But if I turn up the Z factor a little bit, we're looking at the same area, and I'll switch on the original where it looks like there could have been a feature. I'll switch it off again, and you can see it's actually part of a ridgeline where it drops off. There's nothing there. It's an optical illusion. And being able to just adjust that makes all the difference. And Hillshade is great for identifying things like old field boundaries, earthworks, and stuff like that. But there are other tools using the same data set that will really, really help you. One of those is called a slope shade instead of a hillshade. So instead of lighting the scene from an angle, a slope shade shades the scene according to, is it sloped or is it flat, and everything in between. So this is a slope shade, how it would look when you load it into the software, and we need to drop down the maximum. What this maximum is the degrees of the slope. And typically with ploughing and allowing stuff, it's usually around 6 degrees or less would be an area where you may see some kind of historic building. So if we change that to 6, we can now see we've got these big areas of white. That implies that they have a bigger slope than 6 degrees. And we've got these areas of black. And you can see, as I was saying, that's the ridgeline running across there. And that's a flatter area. So coming away from that, I did mark a couple of things on the map just to explain what we might be looking at. You can see at a glance areas where there's more likely to be some kind of settlement, because they're a place where they're more likely to be built because it's flat. So it's a quick way to almost filter on what data you have. And so this was a little area I picked on earlier. Like I said, I don't know anything about it. But when I zoomed in, I could see there was just a little line, horizontal line across here, which makes it interesting. Now, if I look at our LiDAR, It's nothing particularly obvious when we look at the hillshade. A couple of marks, but I wouldn't necessarily catch it immediately. Even with changing the angle or changing the Z factor, it's not quite obvious to me. But popping that slope back on, we can change that maximum value. So the lower we go, basically the flatter it is. And as I do that, you can see that more and more features start to pop out in this particular area, flattened ground. We've got a boundary here. That might be somewhere that I want to go and check out because potentially there is some kind of archaeological site there. That is just one clear example of where slope is really handy. And you can see it shows up all the houses here. You can see those house areas, those flat building areas. It will show you things like the flood plain from a river. That's going to be pretty obvious to see. And you'll see things that you didn't see before, like there. That could be a barrow or perhaps a pond. I'd have to look into that further. And it's just a really great tool for quickly being able to skim across and find features. If I reset that to about 7 for a second, this is another example, and this is quite common. Something that's probably there. If I pop the original hillshade on, you can just about make out that could be something around here. Not sure what this is. We can turn on the Google Earth minute. So it could be a quarry in a woods, and then we've got some fields there. But looking at the LiDAR, potentially is something, but again, we can't explore that further with limited online LiDAR. So switching that off, we'll go back into the DM and we can change that angle. And as I do, it becomes really clear to me that we're looking at a perfect circle round feature. This is likely going to be a large enclosure or hill fort, I would have said. Looking at it is the likely thing. So again, something that I'd want to look into further. And it's not just these kind of things we can do with QGIS and freely available data. We can then improve our own process and add things like, I might want to add a flood map so I can see what areas are likely to flood, and that's going to give me an idea of where there's water sources as well. I might want to look at old tide maps, so I can add those on, and I can not only can I have them as sort of normal overlaid maps like this, I can then layer them on top of my data to give me an idea of perhaps if I'm looking at field boundaries or something like that. If I suspect that the LiDAR is showing me a field boundary, I can cross-reference that against a tide map. I could change that to the 6-inch OS 6-inch from about 1900. I can add contours. I can add 1946 aerial and so on. Basically, the amount of data you can bring is endless. And what's more, you could mark things on a map. You could export it to a KML file or a GPX file and import it into your phone. So when you're out in the field, you can see exactly where you want to be on a map to sample an area. I hope you found that interesting. A lot of my videos are out there on YouTube. I'm sure Chris will drop a link in so you guys can have a look if you're interested in finding out more. And I hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.